Good morning, everyone, or good evening, as the case may be. Thank you very much for joining the webinar. This is the International Tiger Day talk for 2023, sponsored by the Tigers United University Consortium. The consortium was founded in 2017 as a way for tiger mascot universities to use their research, teaching, and extension capabilities to engage with tiger conservation. The speaker series spotlights tiger conservation leaders. Past guests have included Andre Kushlin, Keshav Varma, Rajesh Gopal, Mahendra Shrestha, and Eric Dinnerstein. Thank you for sharing your stories. Today we have a special program highlighting the work of Dr. Sandeep Sharma, a relatively new member of the community. First, I would like to introduce Sandeep's former mentor, Dr. John Seidensticker, to say a few words. John?
Hi, I'm John Seidensticker, and I've had the great honor to have worked with some incredible people and studied some iconic animals over the last 5 decades. And these include golden eagles and cougars and grizzlies and elephants and leopards and sloth bears and tigers. But among the fantastic people I've worked with are Sandeep Sharma and his partner, Trishna Dutta. Now, normally, the best a Ph.D. advisor can do is assure the questions being pursued are well-grounded and the conditions you control for the project success are in hand. But Sandeep wanted to understand the landscape genetics of tigers in the central Indian landscape, or the central Indian highlands. It is a precursor to establishing the conservation interventions needed for the tiger's long-term persistence, and this is what he went out and did. Now, the conditions needed for this project to succeed were well out of my hands. So I stand in awe of how Sandeep met the challenges, the many challenges he faced in the field, in the lab, and in publishing his results, and finally taking his results back to the people who will make the decisions and actions that will decide the tiger's future. And I think most importantly, Sandeep has done so in a humble way, and that they are being given serious considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. For those who don't know the storied career of Dr. John Seidensticker, he has been in the field over 50 years, as he mentioned. And as a Smithsonian scientist, he led many projects that helped transform wildlife conservation as a field. And he was recently honored by the Indian government with the Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you for those comments. Now, I'll continue the introduction of Sandeep with a couple of details about his career, and then we will move on to the talk. Sandeep has a decade or more of field experience and dozens of publications related to tiger conservation. As John said, he's an emerging leader in conservation science. Together with his partner, Dr. Trishna Dutta, they pioneered groundbreaking studies of genetic connectivity that John detailed. Building on the foundation he received from John and the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, Sandeep conducted postdoctoral research at the Institute for Parks at Clemson University. This he followed by conservation science at the Smithsonian on mangrove tigers in Bangladesh. He's also worked with the Nature Conservancy and the World Wildlife Fund. Today, he is based in Germany at the Center for Integrative Biodiversity Research, focused on rewilding in Europe and building capacity for conservation across South and Southeast Asia. John alluded to Sandeep's humility. He's known for his quiet leadership and staying out of the political fray, which can be difficult in tiger conservation, as I'm sure John will assert, while publishing thoughtful research and conducting field projects that directly address the world's most intractable conservation problems. He and Trishna proudly carry forward the legacy of Dr. John Seidensticker, who, along with Dr. Rajesh Gopal, was just awarded the 2023 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Global Tiger Initiative Council. This webinar today is hosted in tribute to the careers of Drs. John Seidensticker and Rajesh Gopal. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sandeep Sharma and his talk entitled Connecting the Dots for Tigers in Asia, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Sandeep, please share your screen and begin.
Can you see my screen, Rob?
I can.
Yes.
Fantastic. So, well, thank you so much. I mean, I'm pleased and honored to talk about my work here. But before that, I would like to thank both Rob and John, because both of you were my previous mentors. I learned life lessons from both of you, and lessons about not only about tiger conservation, but geopolitics of tiger conservation while talking to both of you. So I'll start my talk by explaining why I thought of this specific title. When we think of connecting the dots for tigers in Asia, we know that the tigers, they occur in 13 range countries in Asia. And their charisma, their appeal, it transcends beyond the boundary of those Asian countries. And that's the reason that you have this Tigers United University Consortium in the US, which is not even a tiger range country. So it's very emblematic that the conservation value of tigers, it moves beyond these range countries. Now, why the good, the bad, and the ugly? Because you must have heard that a few of tiger range countries, notably India, Bhutan, Nepal, they have increased their tiger numbers in last 12 years since the last St. Petersburg summit. So that's the good part. But then there are other parts that we also need to remember, because without that, conservation is simply a crisis science, as John had told us many years ago. And it's our collective responsibility to save this iconic species by keeping our sights very clear about these objectives. So without further ado, I'll start my talk. So what you see here is a Google Earth imagery product called Black Marble. You might have seen the blue marble images, but there's one specific reason that I have chosen this Black Marble here, because on your screen, this specific snapshot of Earth is showing those 13 tiger range countries. And what you see here is these nighttime lights showing the human footprint in those countries. Now, if you compare that with the night light from Europe or even North America, you would see a stark contrast. But don't let this image fool you, because more than half of the world's population reside in these in this circle that you see on your screen right now, around about 4 billion people. But this area is also treasure trove of iconic biodiversity. So one of the hotspots of vascular plants, a lot of endemism, a lot of carnivore species, mammal species, but let's talk about some of these iconic species. So we have elephants, we have 5 species of bears, including giant panda in this circle. We have 3 species of rhinos and many other species of small but equally important animals and birds, including the tigers, which occur in these 13 range countries. But let me start with Tiger Biology 101. So if you want to conserve tigers, what do you need? You need to understand their biology. And it's very simple. My fellow tiger biologists and conservationists, they will agree that conserving tiger is relatively very easy task. If you want to save them, if you want to conserve them, you need to conserve their habitat. They need very large habitats, and they need a good prey base. So if they have a place to live, if they have food to eat, the population will grow on its own. And then the third most important requirement, which is very specific for Asian range countries, is human footprint, human influence. So you have to keep these areas inviolate of any human intrusion, including poaching, including a lot of infrastructural development. But unfortunately, that's not the scenario. So now on your screen, what you see is the blue marble, and and those color polygons that you see is IUCN's Red List range map of tigers. Red is obviously the former range of tigers, and you may notice that the tigers have lost almost 73% of their historic range in last several years, last few decades. In yellow, you see the places where we still are not very sure if the tigers persist or not. And in green are the places where we know for sure that the tigers persist. So we are talking about around 5,500 tigers. And as you can, if you notice on those green polygons, you can see that they are very fragmented. That's one point. The second point, if you look at Southeast Asia, countries like Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, you see that it's completely red. So tigers have functionally gone extinct in these areas. So whatever hope that we have is mostly in South Asia and other countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. But the problem is that most of the population there is completely fragmented. But before that, let's talk about numbers, because numbers, they appeal politicians, and numbers are a good indicator of success. So last week on Global Tiger Day, Bhutan has announced 27% increase in its tiger population, going up to 131 individuals. Bangladesh has already announced it in 2019, 114. And I was a part of that endeavor in Bangladesh, where we were counting tigers using camera trapping and DNA-based methods. Nepal has announced last year that they have 355 tigers, and India's number is 3,682. So while all of these numbers give us a reason to rejoice, let's not forget that we still have to achieve a lot. And in my opinion, in my perspective, what we need to achieve, I'll outlay that in next few slides. But before that, let me start talking about, I'm from India. So let me talk about the effort of tiger conservation in Indian continent. So this year is the 50th year of Project Tiger. It began in 1973 with these 9 tiger reserves that were selected on the basis of their representativeness. So these 9 dots, yellow dots that you see, were those 9 tiger reserves scattered all across India, representing different ecosystems, from mangrove, from rainforest, dry forest, and tall grasslands in Himalayan foothill region. But then soon it started growing. So in last 50 years, the numbers of these tiger reserves have gone up from 9 tiger reserves to 53 as of now. And of course, the area that is under these tiger reserves has also tripled in last 50 years. So essentially, we are talking about a lot of area for tigers in India. And of course, it will translate into numbers. But it also gives us an opportunity to introspect what has caused the success, and what can we do apart from whatever we are doing right now to make it more successful. So there was this interesting paper led by those people who were the leaders of bringing the tigers back from the brink in last decade and a half. And in their paper, they talk about this one very specific issue. So they say that a core area of about 1,000 square kilometers is required to establish a source population, which is mandatory. And this area should be able to sustain about 20 breeding females. But the next line is equally important. So if you want to maintain these tiger populations viable, then they need to be remain connected through these habitat corridors or connectivity. And that was, one of the reasons that I had selected connectivity as my research topic. I'll come to that in a couple of minutes. Now, I prepared this map showing those 53 tiger reserves that we have in India. And if you look at the minimum habitat requirement of 1,000 square kilometer, you would see that almost 50% of these tiger reserves are very small in their size. And if we look at the tiger numbers that are there in these 53 tiger reserves, you would notice that there are only few tiger reserves that have more than 50 or 100 tigers in them. So of course, these populations that have more than 100 tigers are acting as source populations. But we should not forget that there are still 18 tiger reserves, designated tiger reserves, that have less than 10 individuals in them. And 5 of those tiger reserves, Dampa, Kamlang, Kaval, Sayadri, and Satkosia, have 0 tigers in them. So the take-home lesson from here is that, and before that, if you notice that these red dots over here, where the tiger population is less than 10 individuals, they are scattered populations. They're not connected to any source population. They're peripheral population. So take-home lesson here is that if you want to maintain the viability of these tiger populations, you have to keep them connected. If you want to bring tigers in these areas where there are less than 10 tigers, you have to ensure the connectivity of these populations to the nearest source population. So I'll go back more than a decade, and I'm talking about my own master's research. I went to these 5 tiger reserves. A majority of them were in central India. So these yellow dots that you see are Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, Bandhavgarh, Kanha Tiger Reserve, Nagsira Tiger Reserve, and Tadoba Tiger Reserve in central India. And while I was traveling, I got to experience the disconnection between these tiger reserves. There are a lot of human development in the metrics. Of course, there's sizable tiger population in many of these parks, even at that point of time. But then there was no study about the tiger movement or tiger functional connectivity between these tiger reserves. And one more thing that I would like to mention here, since Clemson is Tiger University and the mascot of university is tiger, and tiger paw is its logo. My master's research was on tiger pug marks, where I was trying to find out an objective, statistically valid method to identify tigers and do population estimation. Although, in India, the pug mark is called as the P word, and nobody wants to talk about it now. But I think by following these tracks and signs of the tigers, we were gaining a lot of information about their distribution. But anyway, let's move on. Now, I would like to mention about one more thing here, is that while I was master's student, this one tiger was found dead about 200 kilometers south of Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, a very famous tiger reserve. It was found dead on a train track. And then interesting thing about this tiger is that its life was documented by this wildlife filmmaker, Colin Stifford Johnson. So Colin was following this tiger for almost 600 years when it was a small cub. The cub was named as Broken Tail because if you see the photograph of the cub close to the mom, its tail had very distinct kink, and by that you can identify it. So he documented the development of this tiger, became adult. After 3 years, the tiger disappeared for almost a year, and then it was found dead. So and you can watch this documentary, Broken Tail, in its last journey. But the question that arises here is that tigers disperse; they leave their landscape, and then for their persistence, you need to maintain these corridors and these connectivities. We know that habitat loss and habitat fragmentation is one of the biggest challenges in tiger range, at least in India. It may have impacted its connectivity. At that point of time, I'm talking about 2004, the population was decimating. 2 of the tiger reserves in India, Panna and Sariska, had lost all of their tigers. There were issues about poaching. Vehicle collision was also one of the reasons. And all of these things might have genetic consequences. So what we decided is to study genetic connectivity for these large carnivores in highlands of central India. And when I say we, it's me and my partner Trishna Dutta. We started thinking about functional connectivity of these large carnivore species for central Indian landscape. So just to orient those of you who are not aware of where central Indian highlands are, the black box that you see on your screen is the central Indian highland. It has almost 20% of world's tiger population. and I would say 1/3 of India's tiger population as of now. We selected these 4 specific tiger reserves there. So Kanha, Pench, Satpura, and Melghat namely. And if you notice here, Kanha and Pench, which are on right, are connected by this forest corridor, and so is Satpura and Melghat. So you see this tenuous forest connectivity between these 4 population patches. And now, if they are genetically functional, what you would expect, the hypothesis is that you would get 2 genetic population. Even the demographically, these 4 areas will have 4 different demographic population. And for that, you need, for DNA analysis or for DNA studies, you need their samples. Now, getting blood or tissue sample is almost impossible in these situations. So what we relied on is non-invasive DNA sampling. We collected lots and lots of tiger scats, their hair, and analyzed them. For their DNA, we sampled almost 15,000 kilometer trail in this large landscape. And then we came up with our results. So I'll keep it short, but just to explain what we found out. So these are the results for tigers. Now, each one of those lines that you see in the bottom for 2 different analyses, each line, colorful line, represents 1 individual tiger. So we ended up collecting 273 tigers. And these 2 colors indicate that there were 2 distinct genetic population, but they were still mixing, because if you look at those pie charts on top, you would see different proportion of red and green. That means these tigers are moving from one protected area to other protected area. And with this DNA analysis, we also found out that there were 7 tigers that had moved while we were studying them and collecting their samples from these different populations into nearby populations. We publish most of these studies in different journals for all of these 3 species. But interestingly, when you compare these population genetic structure of these 3 species, you see these 2 distinct clusters. So that means, and it's very prominent for sloth bear at the bottom, you see that Melghat and Satpura, which are connected by these forest corridors, have more red. Pench and Kanha has more green. That means these corridors are functional. So after that, I asked another question, but before that, let's conclude the first part. So we found out that tigers and leopard populations are genetically very healthy in this metapopulation. Of course, there were 2 distinct genetic populations. And then tigers have higher admixture than leopards and sloth bears. You see a lot of mixing of that red and green because tigers can move larger distances than these 2 other species. But then I was also intrigued to find out what is the difference between historic and contemporary gene flow in this landscape? Because with DNA, you can achieve that. So this figure was very interesting for me. What you see on top is historic gene flow. So we are going almost 2,000 years back with this DNA analysis and comparing it with contemporary gene flow, which is in the bottom. Now, one striking feature over here is the thickness of lines. So the color of line, it represents the source population. For example, yellow is where Kanha is source. The thickness is showing magnitude of the gene flow. And then directionality is, of course, the direction of the arrow wherever it's pointing. So just with a cursory look, you can find out that historically the gene flow was quite strong in this landscape, which has reduced significantly now. But despite that, those populations that are connected by these forest corridors, for example, Kanha and Pench, for example, Satpura and Melghat, and even Pench and Satpura still has very good gene flow. That means these forest corridors are genetically functional. So what we concluded is that contemporary gene flow, of course, is significantly lower than the historic gene flow that was there 2,000 years ago. And then it's mostly because of habitat fragmentation. But then these corridors are very crucial to maintain the gene flow that was still there 2,000 years ago. So that gives us even more conclusion or more power to vouch for conservation of these corridors. So what happened after that is a very interesting story. I was very excited. Trishna and we were very excited. We went to the wildlife warden of the state and we were talking to him. And he just told us that if you just tell me about gene flow, it won't give us any information about where I should put my resources to conserve these corridors. And that's where this second project started, where we expanded the these areas to 15 protected areas in central Indian landscape, where we started finding out the structural connectivity and started prioritizing most of these corridors. These colorful lines that you see on these maps, they are showing the gene flow, the simulated gene flow from one park, one tiger reserve to other tiger reserves. And if they're yellow, that means it's showing that the gene flow is concentrated in that area for some reason. Maybe the forest width is small there, maybe there's a barrier there. So the next step, we started mapping these barriers very systematically. It took us almost a year to map all of these barriers and validate them in the field. So there were barriers with mines, there were barriers with water reservoirs, there were barriers with rail and roads. So we mapped all of them. And then we created these scores. So we also included information about tiger population density in the source population, and then different kind of barriers. And then we gave them scores, and we also find out places where these barriers can be improved to improve the overall gene flow or connectivity in this landscape. But then it led to another interesting project. We were participating in this landscape symposium in central India, and one of the person from NGO said that, you know, there were so many studies in this landscape, we just need one map. And that's where we started thinking about synthesizing these studies. Now, I must tell you one thing, that we have many genetic studies or many connectivity related studies done in this landscape. But most often the tiger biologists don't like to talk to each other. That's a different reason why they don't want to talk to each other. But in this study, the lead author of the study, they tried to bring all of these 5 studies together to create what we call consensus map. And what we found out, that this consensus map has a lot of similarities. And with this, the new data that we are getting from a new tiger report, we are finding out that almost 80% of the distribution of tigers in the central Indian landscape are within 5 kilometer width of these consensus corridors. So this map is extremely helpful when you are trying to think about development in this landscape, when you're trying to think about smart green infrastructure in this landscape. Let's move on to another landscape where we are working for last couple of years. So I'm talking about Sumatra. We have a distinct subspecies of tiger in this landscape on the island of Sumatra in Indonesia that has lost almost 50% of its forest since 1985 because of lots of reasons, including oil palm plantations and expansion. So one of the studies where we picked up 3 species, Sumatran tiger, sun bear, and Sumatran elephant, 3 iconic species of this landscape. One of my students and colleague, Valentin Deans from here, conducted this study. And the most striking feature over here is that these consensus corridors for these 3 iconic species are very few and narrow in the island of Sumatra, and they are mostly concentrated on the western part of Sumatra, western southern part of Sumatra. But then we did another study. So another student, Sarah Fiedler here, we worked together, and we wanted to find out how this connectivity has changed over last three or 4 decades. So we took different timelines over the years, and in these 4 maps, what you can see is that the connectivity has dropped significantly. So from 1992 to 2020, you can see, if you just focus on the red colors, you can see that the corridors have thinned out, and even their numbers have gone down. Now, another concept that we have been working on is called anthropogenic resistance, and it's very interesting. So when you map connectivity, you think of people as static factors, and you just use their population density to do all of those analysis. But people behave differently. They have different perceptions, they have different attitude, they have different likings or beliefs about these animal species. And if we don't account for that in connectivity, our connectivity maps are incomplete. So over here in this picture, you can see that the tiger is lying there under the culvert, and people were walking over that culvert for the entire day, but the tiger didn't move much. And in the other picture, you see the extreme contrast. So if we don't account for these things, as I've said, our connectivity maps are incomplete. We are working on another project with a colleague, Prajakta Hoshangabadkar, where we have selected one specific landscape in central India, southern part of central India, to see the impact of this anthropogenic resistance. But let's move on the broader topics. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, in my opinion, there are three major issues regarding connectivity of the tiger population and the long-term persistence in the landscape, not only Central Indian landscape, but if we look at entire Southeast Asia, South Asia. Human tiger conflict, infrastructure, development of linear infrastructure, and the factors that are decimating their habitat. I'll briefly talk about human-wildlife conflict. And I have picked up this one yellow dot that you see on your screen right now. It's called Tadoba Andhari Tiger Reserve on the southern part of Central Indian landscape. 2 decades ago, this area has very few tigers. I would say about 35 to 40 tigers. And this was the period when I had just started my master's project. Now this landscape has close to 250 tigers. And this has become a hotspot of human-tiger conflict. Just last year, in 2022, 51 people died in this landscape because of tigers and other wildlife. Almost one life was lost in this landscape every week. And then these dispersing tigers have moved to other areas, left and right. So on right, you have Gadchiroli district, a county very close to Chandrapur. And that area, last tiger census, last tiger population monitoring exercise had just 2 tigers. Now it has over 20 tigers. And in that area also, one human life was lost almost every 2 weeks. So, rising tiger population in India is blamed for this human tiger conflict, but we need to find out solutions for that. I'll give another example. This is from the west side of this landscape called Tadoba. In 2018, this one specific tigress, it was named as Avni, it killed 13 people in a period of 2.5 years. She had 2 cubs. Eventually, she was declared man-eater, and then she was shot in 2018. It even made to the New York Times, and it gave details about the entire issue. But then this also presented this opportunity to think about the dissonance among community, among local people and the people who are distant from this place. So, this is very interesting. These pictures are very interesting because when the government decided about killing this tigress, shooting down this tigress, there was a huge campaign on social media about saving this tigress, whereas the local community was in favor of eliminating this tiger. So on the first death anniversary of this tigress, the shooter was felicitated by those villagers. Now, I'm talking about all of this because it just shows that dissonance between people who are living in urban areas and people who are living in rural areas and experiencing that at first. We need to bridge that gap. We need to make communities in favor of tiger conservation. And without that, success is just momentary. The second problem is roads. Now, this striking image, the thing that you would notice is that there are a lot of roads in India. It's completely filled with these roads. There are 5.2 million kilometers of road network in India. And of course, it goes through tiger reserves and these kind of things happen. So there were instances where the tigers died on the road because of vehicle collision. Now, there was a study in 2020 by Carter et al., and they found out that in this study, they were basically mapping roads in tiger conservation landscape. And if you notice over here, India has the highest density of roads within these tiger conservation landscape, and that creates another challenge. And this is India that I was talking about. There's another study that was published recently that tried to estimate conservation risk of roads on apex predators for the entire assemblage of apex predators all across the earth. And the most striking result from this study was that 8 of these top 10 species they occur in Asia, and 4 of them occur in central India. So sloth bear had the score of 9.8, the topmost. It's one species that is affected most by these road density, followed by tiger, followed by another endangered species, dhole, and leopards, of course. So roads are a problem. India has doubled its tiger population, but India also has very ambitious goal of increasing the road network. Government aims to increase these roads by 45 kilometers per day in next fiscal year. They even have more ambitious targets of making it 60 kilometers per day. So it's simply mind-boggling. I don't know how these road density is going to affect tiger survival in this landscape. If you look at, let's go back to this study again, Carter et al. Study. If you look at this about projection of road length in 2050 in these tiger conservation landscape, 3 of these tiger range countries that have doubled or increased their tiger population, namely India, Nepal, and Bhutan, have a very high projected road length increase in next 20, 30 years. People often say that we can mitigate all of these issues by creating flyovers, by creating underpasses, but that's, in my opinion, that's just a bandit approach. First of all, you have to avoid the roads going or passing through these sensitive areas, and it's also financially not very viable. Third problem, habitat destruction. And I have focused on one specific problem that is pertinent to central India, which is coal. And all of us know that coal is important for economical growth. But if you look at distribution of coal, so on your screen, you see the map of India, those 53 tiger reserves, designated tiger reserves. And those red polygons that you see are coal fields in India. A majority of those coal fields are in southern part of central India or northeast part of central India. Northeast part is also a very important habitat for elephants, and there are elephant corridors in that landscape. And I'll show you a couple of images about the severity of this impact. So these 2 dots that you see are Satpura Tiger Reserve and Tadoba Tiger Reserve. I'll focus first on Tadoba Tiger Reserve. Now, if you pay attention on the southwestern side of Tadoba Tiger Reserves, you see those white scars. These are open cast coal mines. So if the tigers have to move, if the tigers have to disperse from this area, which already has 250 tigers, they don't have much space to go on southern side. And if I focus on this specific black inset, you see a big coal mine along with this thermal power plant, which is right at the edge of Tadoba Tiger Reserve. The second one is Satpura Tiger Reserve. And when John was there a few years ago, John and us, we traveled through this corridor, and John had seen that city. So in the inset, that here you see another area where we have open cast coal mines right at the center of the corridor, and a city with this thermal power plant. So what I'm talking about here, they're just 2 simple case studies over here showing that our corridors are getting choked by these developments. We need to find out some alternate solutions for that. In my opinion, roads are bisecting these corridors and connectivity, and these kind of developments like mines and reservoirs and infrastructural development, they are going to choke these corridors eventually. Going back to the figures about coal consumption, so India stands at 3rd number in terms of global coal consumption in year 2022. And then if you look at projected consumption of coal, India is almost number 1. The projected coal consumption is almost going to go up by 12.2% in 2024, according to this report by International Energy Agency. So India needs coal, and where will it come from? So India has its own coal fields that are under these tiger reserves, if you remember the map that I had shown, but a majority of that coal to India is also coming from these countries. So this is government's its own data. And as you can see that almost 35% of coal is coming from Australia, and remaining is coming from Indonesia. And guess what? It's coming from places like Sumatra, where we have another subspecies of endangered tigers. So, you know, it's a very complex conundrum here that I'm talking about. Initially I was thinking that I won't talk about palm oil, but you know, the story is incomplete if you don't talk about palm oil, because that's another case where India is importing almost 60% of palm oil that is produced in tropical countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. And of course, that's causing problem in tiger habitat. But here starts the, I would say, the ugly part. So I live in Europe right now, and we are talking a lot about this European Green Deal, where if I read it for you, here the European Commission, they're going to invest almost 1/3 of 1.8 trillion euros to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 55% by 2030. Very ambitious target. So everything is looking rosy in Europe. The forest is growing, but where are the impacts? So if you look at the published paper, it clearly says that this Green Deal is offshoring most of these environmental damages to other nations, often tropical nations and poor nations. And the figure itself, it's self-explanatory, that the forest cover in EU is increasing. This is data from 1990 to 2014. So it's increasing, but where are we losing the forest, which is linked with the afforestation or forest growth in Europe? Indonesia is one of the biggest players over here. Indonesia is losing its forests to meet the demands from Europe, from European Union. So, and one more important fact that I would like to narrate over here is that 12% of this deforestation in tropical area is actually linked with this European Green Deal. And then who's this another interesting map over here. So who's actually contributing to deforestation abroad? This data from 2013, and all those countries that you see in yellow or gray on top. These are the countries that are actually causing deforestation in these tropical countries, which are denoted by purple or tones of purple. So I think, to sum it up, I think we live in a world where there are issues about equity related to conservation of these iconic species. And if we want to save iconic species like tigers, rhinos, elephants, and many other equally important species in tropics, then we need to think of ways to reduce this dissonance and make the world more equitable. So with all of this serious talk, I would like to give you a moment of calm with these 4 lines that I really like. These lines are from one of the epics, very famous epics called Mahabharata in India. And it's written in Sanskrit on top, but I've translated it for you. So these 4 lines, they summarize everything that I have said so far. Do not cut down the forest with its tigers, and do not banish the tigers from the forest. The tiger, of course, perishes without the forest, and the forest perishes without its tigers. So just these 4 lines, if our policymakers and decision makers and politicians, if they can understand and embrace these 4 lines, the world would have been much better. So with that, thank you so much. Thanks for this opportunity.
Sandeep, thank you so much. We have had some questions come through. We've got about 10-15 minutes here, so we'll run through those if you're ready.
Yes.
Okay. The first is just a shout out to John. I'm not sure if you've seen that, from Bill McShay. And then Ramesh asks, it seems very interesting. I think this refers to a photo in your presentation just before you began talking about the roads. If you want to go back and reference that, but it seems really interesting. The tiger sleeping below the culvert with the people walking over it. The background of the photo seems to be a non-forest landscape. So how are you considering it as a coexistence or potential to human-wildlife conflict?
That's a very interesting question. By the way, that picture was taken in Ranthambore Tiger Reserve, And those people who were over the culvert, they were going for pilgrimage. So there's this temple right at the center of Ranthambore Tiger Reserve. And so to answer your question, it's already a dry forest. And although the background seems non-forest landscape, it's dry forest, so you don't see much green. And there are a lot of tigers there. So coexistence is in that landscape is only possible because people are sort of habituated of seeing people, and they see people as, they don't see people over there as enemies. So I think that's a simple answer that I can think of.
Great, thank you. Our next question here says, during the complicated situation like the Avani tigress, the support from the local community and the opposition of the long distance community, the communities have different interests. The government and local organizations should listen to whom, which would be more beneficial for long-term tiger conservation?
It's a very interesting question, and I don't have a very clear answer for that. I was talking about this dissonance, and I think if I'm representing the government organization, I would definitely listen to the local people, because they are the custodians of those forests. They are custodians of those wildlife that lives there. And I'm using the word custodian, but it's more about coexistence. They have to bear the brunt, not the people who are living in far isolated areas in urban regions talking about conservation of these tigers. But we have to, in conservation, you have to make some hard decisions, and it's one of the paramount examples of those hard decisions.
Great. This next question here says, warm greetings from Bhutan. Thanks for a very nice presentation. As per the statistics, India recorded 3,682 tigers. How many species of tiger are there in India?
Well, I think in terms of species, it's just one species of tiger in India.
Just one species, yeah.
Tiger in,
One subspecies.
Yeah, one subspecies of tiger in India.
Thank you for clarifying that. The next question is regarding the Green Deal. There's also the deforestation-free products regulation that puts onus on companies to ensure agricultural commodities that are imported or exported have not been produced or on deforested land. So that's a comment if you have anything to add.
No, I would just take that comment.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you, Trishna. Thank you for the comment. Okay, the next here. Is there any tiger insurance schemes for those people who lost their lives? Any tiger insurance?
Yeah, thanks, Yeshi, for that question. I'm not aware of any tiger insurance scheme. I don't have any idea about that, unfortunately.
Let's see here. How would someone go about collecting the historic genetical linkage with the present genetic linkage?
Okay, so it's a question related to the methods. There's this, in our case, we have used this program called Migrate, and in that program you can link. So you get these genetic lineages and you do a backtracking, and I don't have much time to explain the entire process, but if you read the Migrate manual, you'll find out how these linkages are converged back in history, and then you can draw conclusions from that.
Thank you. What do you think would be the best way forward, the way forest laws are being diluted everywhere, especially in forest ranging countries like India?
Well, this is very difficult question, and in fact I was perplexed because I initially thought that I should talk about these issues that are happening in India. The Forest Amendment Bill that was already passed by the lower house 3 days ago around the Global Tiger Day, and it was slated for revision in the upper house today. I don't know the results yet, but if it happens, it's going to create a big problem for wildlife conservation, biodiversity conservation in India, in my opinion. And there are a lot of ramifications to that. I don't know the way forward. We have to make some collective impact. And as I've said, that the tiger conservation is global responsibility. So not only from India, but international organizations should also make some noise about it.
I think this next question you sort of addressed about how you collect data from the historical gene flow. So we'll move on. What do you think about social carrying capacity of tigers in India?
Very interesting question, Atul. So social carrying capacity, if I understood rightly, I mean, how many tigers you can have in a landscape where you have a certain amount of human population density. And if that's true, then it's very difficult, to calculate this social carrying capacity, because India is 1.4 billion people. We are talking about 1.4 billion people, and a majority of that populace is living in not within, but around these tiger conservation landscape and tiger reserves. So I'm not a social scientist, so unfortunately, I won't be able to give you a clear answer. But for India, it's going to be difficult, in my opinion.
Thank you, Sandeep. Okay, Bruno says he's really interested in your expose on anthropogenic resistance and the differences among communities. Do we understand well the reasons and what is being done to learn and share good practices across these communities?
Well, good to see you here, Bruno, and thanks for your question. So if I understood it correctly, I'm reading it again. Well, we know the reasons. We know the reasons of coexistence and how can we make it more amenable. But I'm not very sure about some of these good practices and if they're shared across these communities. Unfortunately, I'm more focused on the science aspect. So this question again is a social science related question. But there are some good practices that are implemented by some of these NGOs in India.
Okay, the next question. Questions are just rolling in. I'll go ahead and let everyone know that if we don't get to all of these, we will answer some after the fact via email. So, but this next question here, didn't know about the international view on the issue. Really, thank you for, this is a comment. Thank you for throwing light on the international coal and palm oil issues. So that was a comment there. Next one here, in context of road development speed in India, do you think the underpass or overpass would be beneficial? I read some articles about government is designing these structures in central Indian landscape and also completely elevated roads from sensitive areas.
Well, thanks for your question, Akshat. I think the solution here is not to violate those areas. We have less than 5% of India's geographical area under protected area purview. So let's not disturb them, avoid them. That's the first answer. And now I'm not a structural engineer, so I don't know whether underpasses or overpasses. But when we are only focusing on tigers, we may find a solution. We might say that underpasses are good over overpasses. But we have to think more holistically. We have to think about all of these other species that live in the landscapes. No clear answer, unfortunately.
Okay. Wonderful talk. What in your wisdom or in experience would increase the connectivity among tiger habitats, given anthropogenic resistance has been increasing and will increase for short and long-term tiger conservation?
So very, very short answer to that. The first thing, if there's anthropogenic resistance because of people, you have to reduce that resistance by educating those people, by educating the community. That would increase connectivity from social aspects. And at the same point of time, you have to work on increasing the forest quality in these corridors and connected areas.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 or 3 more here. This next one says, the tiger conservation policies in India focus on the creation of inviolate spaces, often misinterpreted as human-free spaces. Could you shed some light on that?
Well, again, this is a tough question, because when we say invalid space, of course, we need areas, we need spaces which are free of any human intrusion. But we also have to be cognizant about the social dimensions of these things and human rights related issues. So to strike a balance between these two things is often very difficult. And my sympathies to those forest officers who are dealing with these intricate issues in India and still managing to create invalid spaces.
Could you explain a little more about the consensus map? What does it tell us about the 5-kilometer corridor radius?
Well, this is a methodological question. I think if I know the name, I can send a detailed answer.
Yeah, whoever that anonymous attendee was, if you want to reply to our follow-up email after the webinar with more detail, Sandeep would be happy to answer that for you. Okay, let's see. We've got a couple more minutes here. Are there cross-border agreements between tiger range nations regarding habitat and population connectivity?
So I only know about these 3 bilateral agreements between India and Nepal, India, Bhutan, and India, Bangladesh. And what's the other part regarding habitat population? I think it's mainly about population monitoring. I'm not sure if it's about habitat or population connectivity or not, but these areas are connected. These are transboundary areas. For example, Manas between Bhutan and India.
Okay. I think the next about compensation packages for tiger victims, you may have already answered. So we'll do one more here. Thanks for such an amazing presentation. Can you put a word on tiger habitats and their carrying capacity? Can India hold more than the present population?
Well, before I answer that, I would quickly answer Anwar's questions. Good to see you all here, Anwar. And there are no compensation. There are compensation packages for tiger victims in India provided by governments. Thanks for your question. Rolling to the second question from Karthik. Thanks for your appreciation. Carrying capacity. Can India hold more than the present population? Yes, it can. But the question here is that, do we really want more tigers? We already have. I'm not against increasing tiger numbers. Maybe we have 10,000 tigers in India, but it'll bring us more problems. Are we prepared to deal with those problems like human-tiger conflict? The community is in favor of these. It's tolerant as of now, but this may change. So these are some tough questions that we have to answer and think of.
And that is a great question, I think, to wrap up today's webinar. Sandeep, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Baldwin and Dr. Seidensticker for being here. On behalf of Tigers United, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. After the webinar, we'll be emailing everyone who registered with a link to rewatch the video. So if there are any other questions that arise, please feel free to reply to that email. And to those questions we didn't get the chance to answer today, we'll be sure to include responses from Sandeep in that follow-up email. Again, thank you on behalf of Tigers United. Please check us out online, tigersunited.org. We're always looking for new partnerships. Again, thank you so much, Sandeep, and we look forward to connecting with you again soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks.